I know so many authors who are like, I was writing my book and all of a sudden one of my characters walked into the room and said, no, that's not what I would do.
We'd love to hear more about the writing process that you took for your first book. Can you talk about what some of the first steps were?
I was absolutely pantsing it. I had the idea, and I still love my original idea, which is why I'm redoing Oubliette. But I just started writing, and I was very much going in chronological order. At least for me, writing chronologically doesn't actually make sense. I found, now that I'm rewriting it, jumping around, going through a whole character's arc as a pass, and then another one, and then bouncing back, establishing things early on that you see in this through line that goes all the way through. That's what worked for me. So I definitely began as a pantser, as they're called, flying by the seat of my pants. And then in retrospect, I realized, ooh, I should have been a little bit more of a plotter. I think folks generally fall somewhere in the middle of that pantser plotter spectrum. But in some cases, folks will want to plot out every little thing. I do think that there's a little bit of the organicness and the spontaneity that can be lost, at least for myself, when just totally plotting things out. But at least for me, that's, from a brass tacks point of view, that helps me. I also am a fan of doing a book series Bible. In other words, laying out the plot of each book. And, the first couple of books in the series are pretty defined. But as I'm writing, then I realize I'm adding more things. It's like the old analogy of when you're driving a car at night. Got the headlights on. You can see so far in front of you, right? You know your destination 100 miles away. You understand that you're traveling there, but there's going to be stuff that happens along the way. And I think we need to allow ourselves just a little bit of grace to expect the unexpected. If a deer comes running out, you're going to slam on the brakes. And sometimes authors need to do that too. I know so many authors who are like, I was writing my book and all of a sudden one of my characters walked into the room and said, no, that's not what I would do. And they realize as they're doing this, a certain amount of magic happens along the way.
And when you began writing your book, you were working a full-time job?
Right? Yes.
So you were doing this on the weekends or at night or lunch hour? Or?
Exactly. The concept came to me when I was watching one of those Travel Channel shows about haunted places around the world. And they were doing one on Leap Castle in Ireland. And they were talking about how in the late 1800s, they emptied it out and they found the remains of over 150 individuals who had died there over the centuries. And I was hooked. So that's what an oubliette is. It's like this pit or dungeon, and it literally translates into a forgotten little place in French. So that idea that all of these people were thrown in there and forgotten is what set up the book Oubliette. And I wanted to have all of these storylines. I had this vague idea of it being a little bit like Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, if you remember that, where he had all these kind of like short stories that revolved around Mars. I would have all these short stories that revolved around the oubliette and have all of these different stories of people that happened throughout different times in history. The French Revolution, the time of the Black Death, the Reformation, all of these, points in history that are just so tantalizing, especially in France. I know the castle was in Ireland. I have a thing for French castles, so I decided to put my castle in French. But that was where the idea came from. And then, to your point, I just started writing at night, weekends, whenever I would find time. I would go out on writing retreats. I traveled to France. I went to Loire Valley where I put my castle before I even had gone there. And then I toured the castles and I was just like, getting all those little pinpricks of just the magic that I was experiencing, seeing these places that I had decided to write about using nothing more than, Google and a few books to do the research. So, for anybody who is thinking about this, how do they juggle their jobs, their parenting, their school, their whatever, find that time to write. A lot of people will tell you, find some time in the morning or at night, whenever you can do it, and get a little bit down every day. And to me, I think that's the best way to go about it, is just start getting that pen on the paper and go.
And was it your plan to write and publish under your name, Desireé Duffy, or did you have a nom de plume planned?
In the beginning, I really didn't know. I didn't think about it. But when I got ready to publish my book, I was vice president of a marketing agency. And I realized this dark fiction novel that I wrote seemed a little bit at odds with my professional life. For me, the choice to have a nom de plume was more about just wanting to keep my brand messaging very, very different. And there's different reasons somebody might want to do a nom de plume. For me, it's not like it's a secret that I write under a nom de plume. It was just a choice that I made at the time so that I could have my day job and do the things that I did professionally and almost have like this alter ego come out, which in a way is a little bit fun. And I was able to kind of lean into that side of my personality. And Vanta and Black is my nom de plume's name. People ask where that came from, and I took forever finding that, but it came from many years ago. They started talking about the color, Vanta Black. Vanta Black is the blackest black that ever was. And I separated it, Vanta Black. I think I was 2 weeks away from getting the website Vanta Black. Somebody else got the URL.
Oh, no.
And so I threw in the M, which is an homage to my grandmother, who was Matilda. So it's technically Vanta Matilda Black. But that's where the name came from, and that was my reason for having the two. Now, I do stress to any author who is thinking about doing the same is look at the reason behind that. Do you realize that by having two different personalities, you're going to have two different brands to work with, and that can mean double the work. If the author wants to write books under two different names, especially then, in my case, I had professional Desireé and then my nom de plume. So it was easy enough because anything that fell under the writing world went under my nom de plume. But if you have two different genres you're writing under, then having more than one nom de plume, now you're two different authors. That might mean having two different websites, social media, because your audiences are going to call for different messaging, different approaches. And in some cases, I've known authors who can juggle having multiple genres under their belt, and they can do it with grace, and they can handle going back and forth. A lot of it also depends upon the types of books that they're writing. If they're in the genre fiction space, and maybe one of them is horror and one of them is sci-fi, not too far off. I can see that working. There's some crossover in your audience there. Amazingly, at one point, I met an author. I don't know how she does it, but she writes erotica and children's books under one name, which is something that I would usually advise not to do. And that kind of goes to the reasons for writing under a nom de plume. Another one of the reasons might be because you do want to keep what you're writing totally secret, totally on the down low. So just be aware of what that means as well. If you are an elementary school teacher and you're writing erotica, what happens to your job if they find out? What happens if the school board finds out, or an angry parent? There could be ramifications for that. Obviously, in that case, you probably would want to keep those two things very separate. So it really just depends upon what you want to do and why you want to do it, and realizing ultimately that if you are going to have more than one name that you're writing under, that it might be increasing the workload as well.
And so when you go to copyright the book under this nom de plume, you're mentioning your real name, or this is now your sort of business name, the nom de plume?
Getting a copyright for the book, when you write a book, when you write something, you, by virtue of writing it, are copywriting it. So when you register with the Library of Congress, You need to make sure that you're putting it under the publishing name or the name that you're using. That's another thing that we'll see folks do. They'll kind of offhandedly be like, oh, my name is William Smith, and then they publish under the name Bill Smith. So you want to make sure those things match up, definitely.